Taemin Kang stood on the balcony of his apartment, watching the twin suns set over New Seoul. The sky turned orange and purple, painting the city in beautiful colors. His daughter ran past him, laughing as she chased their dog through the living room. His wife called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready soon. Taemin smiled. Life was good. New Seoul was humanity's greatest achievement. 8 million people lived on this terraformed world. The air was clean. The cities were safe. Children played in parks without fear. This was what humanity had worked for, what they had dreamed about for generations. A new home among the stars. Taemin was an admiral in the United Earth Defense Fleet, but there had been no wars for 20 years. His job now was mostly ceremonial. He attended meetings, signed papers, and gave speeches about peace. He liked it that way. He had seen enough fighting in his younger days. Across the city, Captain Ji-woo Park was running training exercises with her Special Forces unit. They called themselves the Ghost Division, though there were no ghosts to fight anymore. They practiced combat scenarios in virtual reality, keeping their skills sharp just in case. But Ji-woo knew it was just practice. The galaxy was at peace. At the Colonial University, Dr. Hyunwoo Nam was presenting his latest research. He had developed new medical technology that could heal injuries in hours instead of weeks. The audience of scientists applauded. This was why Hyunwoo had become a scientist, to help people, to make life better. He felt proud. That morning, exciting news had arrived. A delegation from the Ascendancy Collective was coming to New Seoul. The Ascendancy was an alliance of 3 ancient alien races. They had been watching humanity for years as humans spread to new worlds. Now they wanted to meet officially, to establish diplomatic relations. Everyone was excited. This would be humanity's first real contact with the galactic community. The Ascendancy ships arrived in orbit that afternoon. They were beautiful, elegant vessels that looked more like art than machines. Taemin watched from the defense station's command center. He counted 12 ships. It seemed like a large delegation, but he supposed they wanted to make an impression. The alien ambassador sent a message. She wanted to meet with human leaders to discuss important matters. Her voice was calm and polite. Taemin relaxed. Everything seemed normal. He sent a message back, welcoming them and inviting them to land at the capital spaceport. What happened next would haunt Taemin for the rest of his life. Without warning, without declaration, without mercy, the Ascendancy ships opened fire. Beams of energy fell from the sky like rain. They struck the city centers, the residential districts, the parks where children played. Buildings exploded. Streets melted. The beautiful sunset Taemin had watched an hour ago was replaced by fire and smoke. Taemin watched the screens in horror. He tried to raise shields, but the station's defensive systems were not ready. They had not expected an attack. Why would they? This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. He tried to call his wife. The communication network was down. He tried to reach his apartment. No response. He watched the tactical display and saw that his neighborhood was gone, erased in the first 30 seconds of the bombardment. On the ground, Ji-woo Park's world turned to chaos. Her unit was in the training facility when the bombardment began. The building shook. Lights went out. Emergency alarms screamed. Ji-woo grabbed her equipment and ran outside. The city was dying. Buildings collapsed. People ran in every direction, screaming, crying, searching for loved ones. The sky was full of fire. Ji-woo tried to help, tried to organize an evacuation, but there was nowhere to evacuate to. The bombardment covered the entire planet. Her unit of 200 soldiers tried to reach civilians, tried to get them to shelters. Most of her soldiers died in the first hour. A beam struck their transport. Ji-woo survived only because she had stopped to help an injured child. She watched her team burn. At the university, Hyunwoo Nam was trapped under rubble. The research building had collapsed when the first strike hit nearby. He could hear people crying in the darkness. He could hear the explosions continuing above. He tried to dig himself out, but every time he moved, more debris fell. Through a crack in the rubble, he could see the sky. Alien ships flew overhead. He watched them fire systematically at every building, every structure, every sign of life. This was not a military strike. This was extermination. After 2 hours, ground forces landed. Ascendancy soldiers in advanced armor moved through the ruins. They were hunting survivors. Ji-woo watched from hiding as they found civilians cowering in basements and shot them without hesitation. Men, women, children. It did not matter. They killed everyone. Jiwoo gathered the handful of soldiers she could find. Maybe 40 were still alive. She led them in a desperate fight, ambushing alien patrols, trying to save anyone they could. They managed to get 200 civilians to a damaged transport ship. It was all they could save. Hyunwoo was pulled from the rubble by rescue workers. They were loading survivors onto evacuation ships. He looked around at the ruins of his city. The university was gone. The hospitals were gone. His research facility was gone. His colleagues were dead. Everything he had built, destroyed in hours. From orbit, Taemin watched helplessly. His defense station was damaged, weapons offline. He could do nothing but watch as the planet below was systematically murdered. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, New Seoul was silent. The Ascendancy fleet broadcast a message to all of human space. Their ambassador appeared on screens across Earth and every human colony. Her voice was still calm and polite, as if she had not just overseen the murder of millions. She said that humanity was too dangerous. Humans expanded too quickly, adapted too fast, fought too well. They were a threat to the peaceful galaxy. The Ascendancy had decided to eliminate this threat before it grew larger. New Seoul was a demonstration. If humanity did not disarm immediately and accept Ascendancy oversight, every human world would suffer the same fate. The final count was 7.9 million dead. Out of 8 million people on New Seoul, only 100,000 survived. Most of those survivors were off-planet when the attack began. Taemin stood in the ruins of the capital city 3 days later. Rescue teams were still searching for survivors, but they found mostly bodies. He walked through streets he had known, past buildings where he had shopped and eaten and laughed. Everything was ash. He found the location where his apartment had stood. There was nothing left, not even rubble. Just a crater. His wife and daughter had been erased from existence. Something broke inside Taemin at that moment. The grief was so huge it felt like it would crush him. But under the grief was something else. Something cold and hard and growing. Rage. He gathered the surviving military commanders. Jiwoo was there, her uniform still covered in dust and blood. Hyunwoo was there, his hands bandaged from digging through rubble. Others came, all of them carrying the same look in their eyes. The look of people who had lost everything. Taemin spoke, and his voice was quiet but filled with iron. He said they would not surrender. They would not disarm. They would not accept Ascendancy rule. Instead, they would show the aliens what humanity could really do. If the Ascendancy wanted monsters, humanity would become monsters. But not the kind the aliens expected. Hyunwoo volunteered his medical technology. He said he could weaponize it, turn healing into harm. His voice shook as he spoke, but his eyes were determined. Jiwoo said her ghost division would become real ghosts, hunting the enemy in the darkness. On Earth, the government met in emergency session. Every representative voted the same way. Totalvar, every resource, every ship, every weapon. They would mobilize everything humanity had. The Ascendancy had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were preventing a threat. Instead, they created one. They thought they were teaching humanity its place. Instead, they awakened something that had been sleeping. Taemin stood before the assembled survivors and made a promise. He promised that New Seoul would be avenged. He promised that humanity would never bow. He promised that the Ascendancy would learn to fear the darkness because humanity would be waiting there. The war had begun. But it would not be the war the Ascendancy expected. It would be something far worse. 6 months had passed since New Seoul. Earth looked different now. The peaceful world of parks and universities had transformed into something else. Factories that once made consumer goods now produced warships. Scientists who studied medicine now designed weapons. Every human had one purpose now: survival. Taemin Kang stood in the command center of humanity's largest warship, the Vengeance. The name was his choice. He did not care about subtlety anymore. He wanted the Ascendancy to know what was coming. The Ascendancy had been quiet since their ultimatum. They were waiting for humanity to surrender. They did not know that humanity was preparing something else entirely. The first strike came in the Arcturus system. An Ascendancy patrol of 8 ships was conducting routine operations. They did not expect any resistance. Humans were supposed to be cowering, defeated, broken. Instead, 30 human fighters appeared from behind an asteroid field. The fighters were new designs, smaller and faster than anything the Ascendancy had seen. They moved like insects swarming the larger alien ships. Lieutenant Deho Shin led the attack. He was young, barely 25, but he flew like he was born in space. His fighter twisted and dove, avoiding enemy fire while his weapons found their targets. He destroyed 3 alien ships in the first minute. The humans used tactics the Ascendancy had never encountered. They did not fight in formations. They did not follow traditional combat doctrine. They fought like wolves, coordinating without apparent communication, striking weak points, disappearing before the enemy could respond. 7 Ascendancy ships were destroyed. The humans deliberately let one escape. On that ship's hull, they painted a message in the alien language. This is just the beginning. While the fighter pilots made noise, Jiwoo Park's Ghost Division worked in silence. They infiltrated an Ascendancy supply depot on the edge of their territory. The depot was supposed to be secure, protected by 200 soldiers and automated defenses. Jiwoo and her team of 40 soldiers moved through the facility like shadows. They had trained for this. They wore adaptive camouflage that made them nearly invisible. They moved without sound. They killed without hesitation. The Ascendancy garrison never knew what hit them. One by one, soldiers disappeared. Security teams sent to investigate never returned. By the time the commander realized they were under attack, half his troops were dead. Jiwoo personally eliminated the commander. She looked him in the eyes before she killed him. She wanted him to know who was coming for them. She wanted him to understand that the ghosts were real. The entire garrison was eliminated in 4 hours. Not a single human casualty. Before they left, Jiwoo's team arranged the bodies in the central plaza. From above, they formed words. You started this. We will finish it. Back on Earth, Hyunwoo Nam worked day and night in secure laboratories. His medical technology had indeed been weaponized. He had created nanomachines that could target specific alien biology. He had designed energy weapons that were more efficient than anything humanity had built before. He had developed EMP devices that could paralyze entire fleets, but there was a line he would not cross. The military commanders wanted chemical weapons, biological agents that would cause prolonged suffering. Hyunwoo refused. He told them he would create tools of war, but not tools of torture. Some called him weak. Others understood that this was the last piece of his humanity, and he was clinging to it desperately. The Ascendancy leadership was beginning to panic. Their patrols were being destroyed. Their supply lines were being cut. And worst of all, stories were spreading among their troops. Stories of human fighters who could not be killed, of Ghost Division soldiers who appeared from nowhere, of weapons that turned starships into debris. High Executive Vraxis, the supreme military commander of the Ascendancy, demanded an explanation. How were these primitives fighting so effectively? How had they developed such advanced tactics in just 6 months? His advisors had no good answers. Humans were adapting faster than any species they had encountered. Every tactic the Ascendancy tried, humans found a counter. Every defense they erected, humans found a way through. The Battle of Kepler Station proved how much had changed. The Ascendancy launched a major offensive with 50 ships intending to destroy a key human border station. They outnumbered the defenders 5-1. It should have been an easy victory. Commander Soman Lee commanded the defense from the dreadnought Indomitable. She was the youngest ship captain in the fleet, only 30 years old, but she had proven herself in the early battles. Taemin had promoted her personally, recognizing her tactical genius. Soman did not fight the way the Ascendancy expected. She used the environment as a weapon. The Kepler system had extensive asteroid fields and debris from old mining operations. She led the enemy fleet into these fields, then used precise weapons fire to create cascading collisions. Asteroids became missiles. Debris became shrapnel. The Indomitable and the other human ships picked off the Ascendancy vessels one by one as they struggled through the chaos. Soman's crew worked with perfect coordination, every shot calculated, every maneuver precise. When it was over, 30 Ascendancy ships were destroyed. The rest retreated in disorder. Kepler Station stood intact, not a single human ship lost. The victory was celebrated across human space, but Soman felt troubled. After the battle, she went to Taemin's quarters on the Vengeance. She asked him if they were becoming too brutal, too ruthless. The tactics they used, the psychological warfare, the deliberate cultivation of fear among the enemy, Was this who humans really were? Taemin's response was cold. He said the Ascendancy had made humanity into monsters when they murdered 8 million civilians. Now humanity would use that monstrous reputation as a weapon. Fear would make their enemies hesitate, make mistakes, break their morale before battles even began. Salman left his quarters feeling unsettled. She understood his logic, but she worried about the cost. Every day humanity became more efficient at violence. Every day, they moved further from the peaceful civilization they had been. Across the galaxy, the Ascendancy intercepted human communications. They analyzed battle reports, studied tactics, tried to understand their enemy. What they found frightened them. Humans were not just fighting back. They were getting better at it. Every engagement taught them something new. They adapted faster than any species in recorded history, and they showed no signs of stopping, no willingness to negotiate. Ambassador Kelrus, one of the few Ascendancy leaders who had opposed the New Soul attack, requested permission to contact Earth. He wanted to open peace negotiations, to stop this war before it consumed both species. High Executor Vraxis denied the request. The Ascendancy did not negotiate with primitives. They had made their decision, and they would see it through. This was about pride now, about not showing weakness. But Kelrus disobeyed. He sent a message to Earth anyway, requesting a meeting with human leadership. He offered a ceasefire, reparations for New Soul, recognition of human sovereignty, everything humans could want. Taemin agreed to meet him. The ambassador arrived on the Vengeance under a flag of truce. He was escorted to the Admiral's quarters where Taemin waited. The conversation was brief. Kelrus presented his offer eloquently, explaining that both species would benefit from peace. The war could end today. No more death was necessary. Taemin listened in silence. When the ambassador finished, Taemin spoke just 4 sentences. He said, "You came here thinking we want peace. We do not. You wanted to show us our place in the galaxy. Now we are going to show you yours." Kelrus was escorted back to his ship. As he left human space, he sent a message to his government. He told them that they had made a catastrophic error. The humans were not fighting for survival anymore. They were hunting, and the Ascendancy had become prey. The war was about to enter a new phase, and the Ascendancy was about to learn what it meant to be hunted by humanity. 1 year after New Soul, the war had completely reversed. The Ascendancy, which had once seemed invincible, was now defending its own territory. Human fleets penetrated deep into alien space, striking targets the enemy thought were safe. Every day brought new losses for the Ascendancy. Every day brought new fear. Operation Deep Strike was Taemin's most ambitious plan yet. A fleet of 40 human warships would attack Thraxis Prime, a major Ascendancy industrial world. This was not a border skirmish. This was an invasion of the enemy heartland. Soman Lee commanded the assault. The Indomitable led the fleet through a series of dangerous jumps, using routes the Ascendancy considered impossible to navigate. Human ships had better computers now, better navigation systems, better everything. Hyunwoo's laboratories had been busy. They arrived at Thraxis Prime and found minimal defenses. The Ascendancy had not expected an attack so deep in their territory. Their ships were scattered, their defenses unprepared. It was almost too easy. Salman used the system's star itself as a weapon. She calculated precise gravitational maneuvers that slingshot human torpedoes at incredible speeds. The torpedoes struck the orbital shipyards with devastating force. 100-year-old construction facilities exploded in moments. The planet below was not attacked. Salman had made that clear to her fleet. They were destroying military and industrial targets only. There were millions of civilians on Thraxis Prime, and Salman refused to kill them. She was fighting a war, not committing genocide. The mission was a complete success. The shipyards that produced half of the Ascendancy fleet were gone. It would take them years to rebuild. The human fleet escaped with minimal damage. While the fleet fought in space, Jiwoo Park's Ghost Division became a legend. They operated behind enemy lines constantly now, striking dozens of targets across Ascendancy space. Supply convoys disappeared. Command centers were destroyed. Fleet anchorages were sabotaged. No place was safe. The Ascendancy military began to crack under the pressure. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. Officers slept in secure bunkers. Everyone looked over their shoulders, afraid of the ghosts. But Jiwoo was struggling. She had become very good at killing, perhaps too good. She could infiltrate any base, eliminate any target, escape without being seen. It had become routine, mechanical, and that frightened her more than combat ever had. She confided in Hyunwoo during one of her rare visits to Earth. She told him she did not recognize herself anymore. She was efficient, effective, lethal, but she was not sure she was still human. Hyunwoo understood. He felt the same way. Every weapon he designed was better than the last, more destructive, more deadly. He was proud of his work and horrified by it at the same time. He told Jiwoo that they had to keep going because stopping would mean everyone who died was for nothing. But he did not sound convinced. The Ascendancy made a desperate decision. They began positioning military assets near civilian population centers. If human forces attacked, civilians would die. They thought this would make humans hesitate. Intelligence reported this to Taemin. A war council was called. Somin argued for surgical strikes, precision attacks that would minimize civilian casualties. Hyunwoo supported her, offering new weapons that could target specific buildings without affecting surrounding areas. Taemin overruled them. He said the Ascendancy was using civilians as shields, which was itself a war crime. He would not allow enemy tactics to dictate human strategy. They would strike with overwhelming force. If civilians died, that was the Ascendancy's choice, not humanity's. Somin protested openly. She said this was wrong, that they were becoming exactly what the Ascendancy accused them of being. Taemin silenced her. He reminded her that she was a soldier and had orders to follow. The Battle of Meridian proceeded as planned. The target was a fortified Ascendancy stronghold that controlled a strategic system. True to intelligence reports, the enemy had positioned their command center in the middle of a city of 3 million civilians. Somin led the attack reluctantly. Her ships fired precisely, destroying the military targets. But the explosions were massive. Buildings collapsed. Fires spread. When the battle ended, the command center was destroyed. So was half the city. Casualty estimates said 200,000 civilians died in the attack. The military objective was achieved, but at a terrible cost. Somin sat in her quarters after the battle and could not stop her hands from shaking. Daeho Shin had been there too, providing fighter cover for the fleet. He watched the city burn below and felt something break inside him. He had killed so many enemy fighters that he had stopped counting. He had earned the nickname Reaper of Arcturus. But this was different. This felt wrong. He recorded a message in his pilot's log, something he did after every mission. He said that today we became what they accused us of being. I do not know if we can come back from this. The human fleet returned to their staging area. There were no celebrations, no victory speeches. Everyone knew something had changed. They had crossed a line and there was no going back. Somin confronted Taemin in his quarters. She told him directly that they were becoming monsters, that vengeance had transformed into something darker. Taemin responded that being feared was the point. Fear kept the Ascendancy from attacking human worlds. Fear saved lives. Somin asked him if that was true, or if he just wanted revenge for his family. Taemin did not answer. Somin left knowing that she was losing faith in her commander. A split was forming in the human military. Some officers supported Taemin completely, believing that total victory required total war. Others sided with Somin, believing that humanity needed to maintain moral boundaries even during war. The arguments became heated. Divisions deepened. Meanwhile, Ambassador Kelris made another desperate attempt to reach the Ascendancy leadership. He presented evidence that the war was unwinnable, that humanity would keep fighting until the Ascendancy was destroyed. He begged High Executor Vraxis to surrender with honor before it was too late. Vraxis refused. He said the Ascendancy had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They would not surrender to a species that had only reached the stars a century ago. His pride would not allow it. Kelris realized then that his people were doomed. Vraxis would lead them to destruction rather than admit defeat. The ambassador began making secret plans, thinking about how he might save what could be saved when the end came. On Earth, humanity's leadership planned the final campaign. Intelligence confirmed that Ascendancy military capacity was degraded by 70%. Their economy was collapsing. Their will to fight was breaking. One more major push would end the war. Somin proposed accepting a surrender if offered, establishing an honorable peace. The Ascendancy had been defeated. There was no need for more killing. Taman rejected this immediately. He said the Ascendancy had murdered 8 million humans. They deserved no mercy. The final campaign would be total. The Ascendancy would be crushed completely, their military destroyed, their government dissolved. Only unconditional surrender would be accepted. When asked about civilian casualties in such a campaign, Taman was cold. He said there were no innocents in the Ascendancy. They had all stood by while New Sol burned. Now they would all pay the price. The vote passed. Operation Final Dawn was authorized. The largest human fleet ever assembled would attack the Ascendancy homeworld itself. Salmon left the meeting knowing that humanity had passed a point of no return. What began as a war for survival had become a war of extermination. She did not know if humanity could recover from this even if they won. The final campaign was about to begin, and the question was no longer whether humanity would win, but what would remain of humanity when it was over. The treaty negotiations took place on a neutral space station at the edge of both territories. Tamin represented humanity. Ambassador Kelrus represented what remained of the Ascendancy government. Between them sat representatives from a dozen other alien species, all watching carefully to see what would emerge from this war. The terms were harsh, but fair. The Ascendancy would recognize human sovereignty over all current territories. They would pay reparations for New Sol, though no amount of money could bring back the dead. Both sides would establish demilitarized zones. Most importantly, both agreed to a truth and reconciliation process. War crimes tribunals were established for both species. Ascendancy leaders who had ordered the New Sol massacre were tried and convicted. But some human commanders also faced trial for excessive force during the war. Taman himself testified, accepting responsibility for his decisions. He was not prosecuted, but the testimony was difficult. The galaxy watched these trials with great interest. Humanity could have taken revenge, could have executed every Ascendancy leader. Instead, they chose justice. It was a powerful statement, one that changed how other species viewed humans. New Sol was rebuilt, but not as a colony. It became a memorial world. A massive monument was erected in the capital, bearing the names of all 8 million victims. The monument had a second wall added later, with the names of all who died in the war, human and Ascendancy both. Jiwoo spoke at the dedication ceremony. She stood before thousands of people and said, "We remember so we never forget the cost. We remember so we never let this happen again. We remember because those we lost deserved better than to be forgotten." The ceremony was attended by both humans and Ascendancy citizens. Some of the aliens were nervous, afraid of how they would be received, but humans welcomed them. The war was over. It was time to build something new. The Galactic Council was reformed with human representation. Other alien species who had remained silent during the war now rushed to establish diplomatic relations with Earth. Some out of genuine friendship, others out of fear. Either way, humanity was now a major power in galactic politics. Soman became Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. She was young for such an important position, but her actions during the war had proven her character. She advocated for peaceful expansion, for cooperation between species, for preventing future wars. Her voice carried weight. Taman retired from the military. He could have remained as admiral, but he chose to step down. He dedicated the rest of his life to peace advocacy, traveling to both human and alien worlds, speaking about the costs of war and the importance of diplomacy. It was his way of honoring his family's memory. He met with victims of the war often, both human and Ascendancy. He listened to their stories, their pain, their anger. He never made excuses for his decisions. He simply acknowledged their suffering and worked to prevent more of it. Jiwoo transformed the Ghost Division into something new. They were no longer assassins and saboteurs. They became a humanitarian operations unit, responding to disasters, rescuing people in danger, protecting civilians in conflict zones across the galaxy. The ghosts that once brought death now brought hope. Her team included both humans and former Ascendancy soldiers. Working together was difficult at first. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. But gradually, they learned to trust each other. They learned that former enemies could become friends. Hyunwoo established a medical exchange program between Earth and the Ascendancy. Scientists from both species worked together, sharing knowledge, developing new treatments. The medical technology that Hyunwoo had created was now being used as originally intended, to heal rather than harm. He never forgot what he had done during the war. The weapons he had designed killed hundreds of thousands, but he chose to move forward, to create something positive. He told students who asked about the war, "I cannot undo what I did, but I can choose what I do next." That is the human gift, the ability to become better than we were. Daeho became a flight instructor at Earth's military academy, but he taught more than just combat tactics. He taught ethics, the rules of war, the importance of knowing when to fight and when to stop. His students called him the Reaper, but he hated the nickname. He wanted to be known for something other than killing. Years passed. The galaxy changed. New alliances formed. Old hierarchies were replaced. Humanity became a bridge between different species, having proven they could be both warriors and peacemakers. A joint military academy was established, training officers from multiple species to work together. The first graduating class included both humans and Ascendancy cadets. They studied together, trained together, became friends. Taemin was invited to give the commencement address. He was old now, his hair white, his movements slow, but his voice was still strong. He spoke to the young graduates about the war, about the darkness humanity had descended into, about the choice they had made to step back from the edge. He said, "You are the generation that will define what it means to be part of the galactic community. You inherit both our capacity for violence and our capacity for mercy. I beg you, choose mercy. Choose it every day, because that is the real answer to the question we were asked." He continued, "They wanted to know if we were monsters. Yes, we can be monsters when we must, but we can be so much more. We can be protectors, healers, builders, friends. That choice is what makes us human. Never forget that you have that choice." The graduates stood and applauded. Among them were the children of those who had fought in the war, humans and Ascendancy together. They represented the future, a future that was possible because their parents had chosen to stop fighting. After the ceremony, human and Ascendancy cadets embraced as friends. They talked about their plans, their dreams, their hopes for the future. The war was history now, something they learned about in classes. They were building something new. Taemin watched them and felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of war, but true peace. The knowledge that something good had come from all the pain and death. His family would never come back. New Seoul would always be a scar on history, but the future was bright. That night he returned to his home on Earth. On his desk was the photograph of his wife and daughter. He looked at it as he did every night, but this time instead of grief he felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had known them, that they had shaped who he was, that their memory had ultimately led him back to the path of peace. He whispered to the photograph, "I hope I made you proud. Not for the war, but for how we chose to end it. We became monsters, but we did not stay monsters. We chose to be human again." Across the galaxy, new colonies were being built jointly by multiple species. Human engineers worked alongside Ascendancy architects. Children of different species played together in parks. Trade flourished. Culture was exchanged. The scars of war remained, but they were healing. On New Seoul, the memorial stood silent under the twin suns. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it, to remember, to learn. The inscription on the monument read simply, 8 million remembered. Never again. For any species. Those 3 words, for any species, were the most important. The memorial was not just for humans. It was a promise to all living beings. A promise that humanity had learned from its darkest moment and would work to prevent such darkness from touching anyone else. Years later, when asked about the war, Jiwoo would say, "We learned that humans can be terrible when we must be. But we also learned that we can choose to be something better. That is what makes us human. Not our capacity for violence, but our capacity for growth, for change, for choosing peace even when we could choose war." Humanity had been tested by fire. They had descended into darkness. They had become the monsters the galaxy feared. But in the end, they had proven something more important. They had proven that monsters could choose to become human again, and in that choice lay hope. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. Hope that even the darkest conflicts could end. Hope that former enemies could become friends. Hope that the future could be better than the past. The stars shone over New Sol, over Earth, over the Ascendancy homeworld, over all the worlds where beings lived and dreamed. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers, but now it had one more thing: it had a future. The human fleet assembled near the edge of Ascendancy space. Over 200 warships, the largest military force humanity had ever created. Every ship carried weapons designed by Hyunwoo. Every crew had been trained to fight without mercy. Every commander knew the mission: crush the Ascendancy completely. Taemin stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and looked at the tactical display. The Ascendancy homeworld was 3 jumps away. In 48 hours, this war would be over. He should have felt satisfaction, but he felt nothing. The grief that had consumed him after New Sol had been replaced by emptiness. Somin commanded a battle group of 30 ships. She had been quiet during the planning sessions, following orders without comment, but privately she was making other plans. She had contacted several ship captains who shared her concerns. They had agreed to act when the moment came. The fleet jumped to the final staging point just outside the Ascendancy home system. The plan was simple and brutal. The human ships would enter the system and begin bombardment immediately. The Ascendancy fleet, what remained of it, would be destroyed. Then the orbital installations. Then the planetary defenses. Within hours, the Ascendancy homeworld would be defenseless. Taemin gave the order to begin the final jump. The fleet prepared to move. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The end of the war. The completion of their vengeance. Then Somin broadcast on the command channel. Her voice was calm but firm. She said she could not follow the bombardment order. She would fight the Ascendancy fleet, destroy their military targets, but she would not fire on civilian populations. She asked others to join her. 40 ships declared support for Somin. It was a mutiny, right at the moment of final victory. The fleet was splitting apart. Taemin's first instinct was rage. How dare she defy him now after everything? But as he prepared to respond, he realized he had a choice. He could order loyal ships to attack Somin's group, starting a civil war among humans. Or he could listen. He called a halt to operations. Both groups of ships waited in tense standoff while Taemin thought. Around him, his bridge crew was silent. They all knew this decision would define humanity's future. While the fleet waited, Jiwoo was completing one more mission. Her Ghost Division had infiltrated the Ascendancy homeworld weeks earlier. Their target was not military. They were extracting Ambassador Kelrus and the other Ascendancy leaders who had opposed the war. Kelrus had contacted Jiwoo secretly, telling her that the hardliners planned to execute all dissenters, rather than let them negotiate surrender. He had sent locations and security details. Jiwoo decided to act. The extraction was dangerous. The targets were held in a secure facility in the capital city. Jiwoo's team infiltrated during the night, neutralizing guards silently. They found 12 prisoners, including Kelrus. All of them were scheduled to be executed in the morning. Kelrus was shocked to see human soldiers rescuing him. Jiwoo told him simply, "We became monsters to survive. Now we prove we can stop being monsters." They escaped the facility and made it to a hidden transport ship. On Earth, Hyunwoo made his own decision. He gathered all his weapons research, everything he had created during the war. Then he destroyed it. He kept only the medical applications, the technology that could heal rather than harm. His colleagues watched in shock as years of work was erased. Hyunwoo recorded a final message. He said, "I built instruments of death to avenge my friends. Now I will rebuild instruments of life to honor them properly. This is the last thing I can do for them." Back at the fleet, Somin requested permission to speak with Taemin directly. He agreed. She came aboard the Vengeance with her senior officers. They met in the Admiral's conference room. Somin presented new intelligence that Jiwoo had discovered during her operations. Classified Ascendancy records showing that the decision to attack New Sol had not been unanimous. Significant opposition existed within their government. Many Ascendancy citizens had protested, but were silenced by their military leadership. Somin argued that the Ascendancy was not a monolithic enemy. They were individuals just like humans. Some were guilty of genocide. Others were victims of their own government. Killing them all would make humanity exactly what the Ascendancy accused them of being. Hyunwoo, connected by video link, supported her. He said that revenge had driven him to create terrible weapons. But revenge was a poison. It consumed everything: He had barely stopped himself from becoming a monster completely. Daeho spoke next. The young pilot said they had avenged New Soul 10 times over. How many more needed to die? When would it be enough? Jiwoo's message arrived then. She reported successful extraction of Ascendancy Peace faction. Kelrus was willing to negotiate immediate surrender. The Ascendancy government was collapsing from within. Total destruction was unnecessary. Taemin listened to all of them. Then he dismissed everyone and sat alone in the conference room. On the table in front of him was a photograph, the only personal item he had kept. His wife and daughter smiling on a beach on New Soul. He looked at the photo for a long time. He thought about what his daughter would say if she could see him now. Would she be proud that he had avenged her, or would she be horrified by what he had become? The truth hit him like a physical blow. His wife had been a teacher who believed in peace. His daughter had been kind to everyone she met. They would not want this. They would not want millions more dead in their names. He had been lying to himself. This war was not about protecting humanity anymore. It was about his pain, his rage, his inability to accept what had been taken from him. He had dragged all of humanity into his personal revenge. Taemin activated the fleet-wide communication channel. Every ship, every crew member could hear him. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. He said, "We came here to show the Ascendancy that we are monsters. We succeeded. They fear us. But now I ask you, what kind of monsters do we want to be? The kind that destroys everything? Or the kind that is strong enough to stop?" He continued, "We have proven we can fight. Now we prove we can stop fighting when it matters. I am ordering a ceasefire. We will negotiate with Ambassador Kelrus. We will accept surrender. The war is over." Some officers protested immediately. They had come so far, sacrificed so much. How could they stop now? But most of the fleet supported the decision. They were tired. They wanted to go home. They wanted to be human again. Somin allowed herself to relax for the first time in months. She had gambled everything on her mutiny, risking her career and her life. But it had worked. Humanity had stepped back from the edge. The Ascendancy homeworld was contacted. Kelrus negotiated with the remaining government. High Executor Vraxis was arrested by his own people, charged with leading them to disaster. The Ascendancy agreed to unconditional surrender. Taemin met with Vraxis in a detention facility. The former High Executor was bitter, broken. He said that the Ascendancy had been right to fear humans. "Look what humanity had become," Taemin responded quietly. "You were right to fear what we could become, but you were wrong about what kind of monsters we would be. We became the kind that can choose to stop." The war was over. But the hardest part, learning to be human again, was just beginning.